2, 1. Hey everyone, welcome back to stage one here at SAE International's first fully digital Innovations in Mobility Automotive Digital Summit. I promised David and Jason here from Jalopnik that I would give them the most awkward introduction as possible. So here it is. You see this lovely slide visual on the screen that says, what are Jalopnik editors excited about? I don't know the answer to that. I want to find out. They are delightful humans. We want to bring a, not necessarily a lighthearted, but a lighthearted and informed twist to this event. They are lighthearted and informed fellows. That wasn't totally awkward, but I'll say it wasn't awkward to make it awkward. So with that, David and Jason, take it away less awkwardly than I just did.
Well, thanks a lot, Matt. I think what Matt was trying to say there is he's brought in two very dorky people to really try to lighten up. We're not going to go too techie. We're just a couple of dorks who cover the auto industry. I'm the senior technical editor for Jalopnik. This is Jason Torchinsky, senior editor, old timer at Jalopnik. We'll do our own little intro to just kind of tell you a little bit about Jalopnik if you haven't read it yet. It's a big car website. We cover the auto industry. We're an enthusiast site. We have roughly a million page views a day. So we see a lot of eyes. We interact with a lot of people. Actually, right now I'm at the 2022 Toyota Tundra event. This is a ranch here in Texas. I'm about to drive the new Tundra. And 2 weeks ago I was at the Rivian press event. So Jason and I, as journalists, we're able to see the industry from a really broad vantage point, and so that's kind of the insight that we can give. We definitely can't be as technical as the rest of you, but we can give you kind of a broad view. Anything else you want to say, Jason?
Yeah, I just want to also add that what we want to kind of talk about here today is because we serve a large readership and we get feedback constantly from that readership. The nature of writing on the web is you see feedback immediately. So if you make a mistake, you know exactly the moment you made that mistake and you get corrected immediately. But we also see what people are interested in, both by the numbers that each story does and the way our audience interacts and engages with those stories. So we get an interesting perspective, both from the manufacturers that take us on all these trips and show us cars and tell us what they're excited about. And then we get the feedback from our readers who actually tell us what they give a damn about. Do they care about these things that the industry cares about? What are they worried about? And it's especially interesting right now at this moment in time because we're currently in the middle of two huge transitional periods. We're transitioning from internal combustion cars to electric cars in a lot of ways. I think there's going to be a mix of those things for quite a while, but we're definitely in a transition to that. And that's getting more and more mature. And we're also on the cusp of a transition between human driving and the start of automated driving, autonomous driving. And there's so many questions with both of these things. So a lot of what you're going to see here has to do with issues related to these two big events that are happening in the automotive world. Because those are things that people are interested in. And we're going to go into this detail about what we hear. And at any point, if you guys have questions or want to know more, we'll take questions at the end. But if you want to put something in the comments, even while we're talking, we're used to being interrupted and called names and corrected. So feel free
to call us names. We're used to it. So have fun with it.
All right, let's see. I can't, David, I honestly don't remember which slide is first. So let's see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Oh, wait. Oh, that's basically what I said. That's what's right. Oh, that was the slide I probably should have put up when I was talking about that. But just to reiterate, this is based on reader feedback, subjects and topics that we see. And we try to keep things with a future tech focus because, know your audience. All right. Oh, this one's okay. I'll start with this one. So, as I mentioned, we're in a transition period between human driving and the start of autonomy. And our readers are very interested in the concepts of autonomy, but mostly really fundamental questions and not necessarily technical questions. There's still a whole lot of fundamental conceptual questions and cultural and behavioral questions that need to be answered when it comes to autonomy. And I do not get the impression that either the industry or the general population feels any of these have been adequately settled at this point. Everything is still very early. So, for example, level 2 autonomy, the only type of autonomy that's available in the market today, there's a lot of questions about that. And a lot of it has to do with how you handle driver monitoring or what the responsibility is of the person behind the wheel. Level 2 systems require a driver to be alert and ready to go at any moment. And if they're not, how do we deal with that? What should be done? Personally, I've written a lot about how I am not in favor of level 2 autonomy. I think it is kind of a dead end, and the driver monitoring problem is significant. And I get a lot of pushback from people about that. A lot of pushback from certain groups, which we'll go into more later. But it's interesting how little understood the SAE, this group's autonomy levels, are actually understood by the general population. A lot of people seem to believe the levels refer to the skill of the car, the computer skill. How good is it at driving itself? When really it's all about the engagement between the driver and the car itself, and how that engagement works and how disengagements are handled and handoff and failover. People don't really understand that. I've had to write multiple times about what that means, and we still interact with, we still get feedback from people who are very confused. People like seeing how these systems can be fooled. They like it when, like is wrong, but they are interested when they see people sleeping at the wheel of a Tesla, when we see how defeat devices happen, how there's tests that show how driver monitoring systems are defeated. There's a lot of interest in how this is going to be both hostile. A lot of our hardcore enthusiast readers are not interested in having a car drive for them. And we also have a lot of readers who think it's absolutely the future and it opens up all kinds of possibilities. So fundamental questions about autonomy are huge, and those stories always do well. David, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, one of the big ones that you discuss is, the value of a system that requires you to be really attentive to the road. You have to pay attention. Do these systems sort of promote that you pay less attention than you should? That's kind of one of the big questions that you ask in a lot of these stories that a lot of people are reading. That's kind of the big thing. It's these fundamental questions, not the technical side of things, which there are tons of questions still unanswered, but just kind of the fundamental, like, does this make sense right now?
Yeah.
Is this
again, the technical side is interesting, but what our readers are mostly interested in is how it's actually expressed and how they're doing it. So lots of questions there, and this is one of those things I don't see changing for a while, in the sense that I think there has to be a lot of questions, because these are things that affect everybody on the road, whether you're in an autonomous vehicle or not. If you're testing, if you have beta software being tested on the road without the consent of everyone around you, that's an issue too. We have a lot of readers who have very strong opinions on that as well, as opposed to companies that are doing geofenced kind of testing. So it's fascinating, because this is a huge transition, and all the questions it brings up are interesting questions, difficult ones, and I think the discussion is important. David, anything else you want to add? You want to go to the next one there?
Yeah, let's keep moving.
All right, then.
Okay. All right. So things are going to get a bit off the wall here. So how do you make EVs fun is a question that maybe not that many people are asking, but there's a small group of enthusiasts who are asking that question. People who are used to ICEs are wondering, okay, how do I make an EV as invigorating to drive? How do I make it as visceral? So, traditionally, let's just say there's a sports sedan, and BMW releases its new M3 sports sedan. What is it that makes that car fun? There are some traditional things that, over the years, make it as lightweight as possible, throw a raucous motor in there that sounds incredible. Bolt that motor to a fast-acting dual clutch transmission or an amazing manual transmission that has just the right feel. There's the way the engine produces power. There's the torque curve. We look at some of the greatest, most fun cars in history. They have unique engines with unique characteristics. The E92 M3 had a 4-liter V8 that you had to rev to the sky. The same thing with the early Mazda RX-7's 13B rotary engine. That was a car that really rev happy. And then, of course, on the other side of the spectrum, you've got, engines like the Cummins 12-valve diesel, which was a really, torquey, low-end torque kind of engine. So these kinds of things are lost on an EV. Obviously, the sound is gone. Torque delivery is similar across all EVs. There's no more shifting, and then weight goes through the roof. There are lots of these sort of visceral elements that kind of go away with EVs. And the question is, does that matter? To current car enthusiasts, yes, it matters. I have a sports car that no longer sounds like anything. I no longer feel that change in acceleration, that jerk from gear to gear. Power delivery is the same, and it weighs 5,000 pounds. So that's something that, I look at our readership, and that's a concern they have. Now, one thing that I should mention right away, it's very unlikely to remain a concern into the future. I think this generation of people who are used to fun ICEs, there's going to be something missing for them. But I think in the future, the idea of what is fun is gonna change. Like all these things that I mentioned, the sound, these torque curves, these shifters, they're all really a result of the technology that we used. ICEs, they deliver, peak power in a certain range, and they don't rev to 20,000 RPM, so you need a transmission. They inherently make a noise because of, that's just the way it works. And these sort of byproducts of the technology have sort of embedded themselves into us as indicators of how fun something is. So I think in the future, when new generations become used to EVs from the beginning, they're not necessarily going to be as they're not going to feel that the fun factor is lacking per se. But that's just something that I wanted to mention because it's in this transition, the diehards, they're talking about it. Now, there are some ways to make EVs fun that goes well beyond, just the sound and all of that. And what I really love to see, especially kind of in the new crop of EVs, is the way that automakers are leaning into the advantages of EVs from a packaging standpoint and styling standpoint. Like, we look at some fun cars over the years. Renault Twingo is an example. Nobody thinks a Renault Twingo is fun because of its engine sound or the way it shifts. The Renault Twingo is fun because of just cool stylistic elements. The interior, the seats fold flat. You can sleep in it. The front end looks like the happiest little car in the world. And with EVs, you basically you can sort of, like from a design standpoint, you can go to a different level. You no longer have these cooling requirements. And so that opens up a lot of doors. Packaging, you don't have this enormous internal combustion engine. You've got the little electric motor or a couple of them with a gearbox in power electronics, but it's a smaller, tighter package. Everything is sort of packaged on a skateboard. And so you can do things like what Rivian's done with their pass-through cubby, which is a lot of fun. And you can do things, Bollinger's got their, all sorts of crazy packaging things that we're seeing. Frunks are becoming a big thing. Everybody loves a good frunk. And so these are obviously great ways to add fun to EVs beyond kind of what we're used to. And we're seeing, and like another example is the Honda E, like a little, almost kind of look retro futuristic little hatchback that just, you look at it and you're just like, that's fun. And so so that's what I like to see. Styling, packaging, a big deal. Jason, I'm gonna talk about this ridiculous idea.
Yeah, but I think this idea is important for people to hear about.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous idea. Do you have anything else you want to say about the funification of EVs?
Well, only in that I think this has been brought up before, but the idea, like when your drivetrain characteristics are so similar across the board, it's inherently going to force car makers and designers to find other places to differentiate their cars. And that's good and bad. I mean, David's right. The reason we've had all these different, like the reason a flat air-cooled motor sounds so different than a water-cooled inline six is just because it's difficult to make liquid gas into a spinning shaft, and all EVs do it the same way. So now you have to focus on packaging, style, software, user interfaces, all these other things that have potential for differentiation are going to become more and more important. And this is good news in a way. Like, it can be done, but there has to be a demand for it, and and people are going to want to have to, we're going to, like, the creativity required by the designers, I think, is actually going to have to go up a notch, and that's potentially fun and good news. So this could be a positive thing, and our job as journalists is to push, the fact, get people excited about the possibilities it could be. Yeah, and I see questions are coming in, and we will address those soon. But David also has an interesting idea that I think could be fun for. There's a lot of possibilities. David, quickly describe what you're talking about.
Okay, this idea is going to make a few of you guys probably shake your heads, but it's just a fun sort of a thought exercise, and that is replicating not just an ICE, but a bunch of different ICEs using an electric vehicle. So the concept is, you walk into an EV, you pull up the infotainment screen, and down come a bunch of options. You can click E92 M3, you can click Jeep Wrangler TJ with a straight 6, you can click Cummins 12 valve. And what happens when you choose the vehicle is that you can adjust a number of different elements to make the car behave like these ICE cars, basically replicating ICEs using EV tech. It's completely pointless unless you're a real enthusiast and you just really need to feel like you're driving something that makes a noise and vibrates and has a different torque curve. But I think it is theoretically possible. I've interviewed a number of engineers for this admittedly ridiculous story, and basically here's how it would work. We'd have an electric motor that would we would essentially replicate the torque curve of all of these vehicles I just mentioned, which is something that you can do with software, shouldn't be an issue. One of the tricky things is replicating the inertia of an internal combustion engine. We've seen some EVs where an electric motor is bolted to a manual transmission. It's never the same. It doesn't feel the same. You're not replicating the car. But you can adjust, you can sort of create an EV that feels like an ICE. You can use regen to slow the motor down. You can send current to the motor to speed it up, to make it replicate the inertial characteristics of an ICE. You can pump sound into the car. You can add actuators to like a seat to make it vibrate. You can adjust the performance of the car to account for the weight. So it's a 5,000-pound EV, and you want it to feel like a Miata. You can't have 110 horsepower. Anyway, it's just a thought exercise of how to basically take the hardware of an EV and make it feel like one of a number of ICEs. The only people who would care about this would be enthusiasts. There's no efficiency benefit, and future generations are going to say, why would you want it to sound like that? Why would you want it to vibrate? Why would you want it to make torque like that? But to an enthusiast, I think it'd be a lot of fun.
I think it's a ridiculous fun idea. And I like the idea they could download different profiles. So if you wanted to see what my Yugo is like, you could do it on your beautiful EV. All right. I think that's let's move to the next slide. But I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about with that. Another thing that comes up a lot and this is one of those things that we get input from the industry and then pushback from the people and the readers, is subscription models. It comes up a lot. I know a lot of the major automakers are considering, do they want to do subscription models for fundamental features like heated seats or driving modes, or some places will unlock extra battery potential based on what you're paying for, all the hardware's there. There was a big issue with Teslas being sold used and then not carrying over subscriptions to things like autopilot or the FSD features that they have. This is very confusing to our readers because I don't think automakers in general have figured out exactly how they want this to work. And people are used to the idea of you buy a car and it has a certain set of features, and those are the features that stay with the car. But when it comes to a subscription model, you might have the hardware to do something in your car, but you haven't actually paid for the right to use it. This concept bothers our readers. They don't want to be hauling around hardware they don't have access to use. It confuses things when you're selling your car used. There's so many questions with subscription models, and the car makers don't want to let it go. They know it's a way to keep getting money out of people after they've sold the car. So at some point, this is going to have to get reconciled, and we have to figure out how we want to talk about it, and what's going to be acceptable for people and companies. David, do you have any thoughts on subscription models for car features?
Generally, people seem to really hate the idea that, hey, their car is outfitted with the proper hardware, but over the air, they have to pay extra for it to come online at a later point. It's just something that people, I don't know, just inherently, the idea is just something they hate.
Hate it. Now, it's interesting. There's a kind of a dividing line for very service-oriented things like satellite radio, or even like concierge services like OnStar or whatever. They're okay paying for stuff like that. But once it's something that would normally have been a physical feature, like BMW was doing some kind of like special like adaptive headlights and seat heaters or something. If it's hardware that's on the car, our experience has been people do not like the idea of having to pay for that. I don't know. I think if it was up to just the readers, this wouldn't even be a thing, but the OEMs are not going to let this go. So again, the only way to deal with this is we're going to have to come to some sort of middle ground of understanding. And we do get that discussion on the site a fair amount. All right. David, why don't you introduce this one here, EV fires?
All right. I'll be pretty brief here. There's a bit of an optics issue right now with EV fires. I think probably everyone who's watching this knows that. They've seen a lot of coverage of EV fires. I mean, obviously part of that is, journalists are not covering ICE fires at the same rate that we're covering EV fires. So obviously a reason for that. ICE fires are a lot more prevalent, but
they're understood.
But they're understood. You understand you've got a flammable liquid, and if it gets hot, bad things happen. It's something that you can sort of internalize. The layperson can grasp it. I think part of the reason why EV fires are such a hot topic is that battery chemistry is still something that people are it's kind of like a black box to the layperson. And the idea that the car can catch fire without showing signs, you let it. There's a delay. Sometimes that's just something that people are just gonna have to get used to. Obviously, the severity of these incidents, they're extremely, these are extremely violent in a lot of cases. These fires, and obviously that's going to catch a lot of people's attention. But this is just a slide that we bring up just because it's a big talking point as EVs become more common. It's a big concern of a lot of people, and in a large part, I think education will go a long way to placating these, sort of getting rid of these concerns.
I think that's a big part of it. I think part of the reason, like, people understand why ICE cars tend to have fires, and it's usually cars that are older. They have a problem where they're actually leaking fuel onto something hot. But the thing that's alarming our readers about the EV fires we've seen is they tend to be new cars. They tend to be cars that are not that old and have been maintained just fine. And the fires don't usually occur in situations where the car is driving, but often will happen while the car is parked. We've seen that with a couple very high-profile Chevy Bolt fires, a couple Tesla fires as well, that take Taycan fire. I mean, these are fires that happen when the car is charging in someone's garage. That puts a lot of anxiety on people when it comes to, like, do they want to move and buy an electric car? They don't want to have something in their garage that may catch fire. Even though it's rare, it's unpredictable, at least to the eyes of most people. And it's, it's not like a maintenance issue. They feel kind of helpless. Like, most people know if you take care of your car a certain way, it's probably not going to catch on fire. These are new. They're in good shape. Why is it happening? This feels like something where, David's right. More education is needed from industry to kind of get out the idea of why this is happening and what can be done. If not leaving your car on a charge for extended periods of time is something that's a factor, we need to make that clear to people. If there's ventilation issues, we need to make that clear. But right now there's recalls and there's some acknowledgments, but there's just not a lot of back and forth with real information for people. And I think that needs to happen because they're scary fires and nobody likes them. All right. Okay, so this is a lighthearted one, but one thing that people have enjoyed a lot is the Chang Li, which is my $1,200 EV that I bought off Alibaba from China and had brought over to America. I think what's interesting about this to people is that, for one thing, it's effectively the cheapest car in the world. It's a little 1.1 horsepower, but surprisingly robust little car. It's got a strong unibody, a real differential, real suspension. And I use this on a daily basis. I take my kid to school in this thing pretty much every day. And it's actually usable, does about 25 miles an hour. And people have loved hearing about this. They love seeing videos about it. They love it when I write about the Chang Li. I took it, you see that picture, there's Sandy Munro, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. He gave the thing a full evaluation and was delighted by how much better than it absolutely has any right to be this thing actually is. And I think it's also showing there's a market for cheap neighborhood style EVs that don't have to be the best at everything, but just get the job done really well. And you can absolutely, in a lot of specific contexts, specific places, specific uses, use this for 75 to 80% of your car driving needs. So it's just been an amazing little experiment to undertake, and we still have more things we want to do with the crazy little Chang Li. David, you've been around through the Chang Li story since day one. So what do you think? Why do people like this?
Millions of people have been reading about the Chang Li. Obviously, the fact that it's dirt cheap is a big part of it, but the fact that you can use this EV for your day, as a daily driver, and you've done zero maintenance to it in a year, and you paid nothing for it, is exciting to people. And of course, the styling as well is exciting. But anyway, we had to mention the Chang Li because it's a phenomenon.
Yeah, people love the Chang Li. All right, more fundamental EV questions. Again, like I said, we're in a transition period. People have a lot of EV questions.
Sorry, guys, I just want to give you the 2-minute warning here. We've still got some questions as well. You're cruising through. Yeah.
Okay, we're almost done. A big EV question.
You want to get to the questions real quick, Jason?
We're going to take questions at the end, or do you want to take one now?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Okay, so just quickly, fundamental EV questions. One of the big ones that's come up recently is when these things, if you have a problem with your EV, they have no real way to get into a neutral gear or to be free rolling. And we've seen issues with them locking up on highways, unable to be pushed out of the way. This seems to be an issue and it bothers people. Battery swap issues. Should there be standardized batteries? Why are they bad at towing? There's a lot of questions, fundamental questions people have about EVs. So that definitely comes up a lot. And then one of the last things we want to talk about culturally, which is fascinating. Automotive culture has always been contentious. There's always been subgroups. We've always had the guys in the rather push a Chevy than drive a Ford hats, but we have a whole new subgroup now that's not quite like anything we've seen before. The Tesla stands, the hardcore Tesla fans. There's a lot of great things to like about Teslas, but we're seeing really odd versions of automotive fandom here. And it's getting to be something that's worth talking about. There's whole religions. This Muscanity thing is like a half serious, but sometimes weirdly almost too serious kind of religion. Criticizing anything about Tesla always gets a huge amount of blowback. It's a whole separate, strange world that's growing on here. And it's one of those things that our readers are fascinated by. And it seems to be worth talking about from a cultural and automotive perspective. David, anything you want to add to that?
It is nope. Let's try to ask a couple of questions here real quick. Digital battery. I'm actually not familiar with that term. Are you, Jason? Digital battery?
I feel like I've heard it used, and I've always assumed it was one of those words that doesn't really mean anything because I'm not sure what it would mean, unless it's referring to a particular kind of like a digital controller on a battery to help manage it and not just a straightforward battery. I don't know. As far as I saw, e-motorcycles penetrating the market. There's some penetration already. Not a whole lot yet, but there are some. And we do have a motorcycle reporter who's driven a few of them and likes them a lot.
But there are some cultural roadblocks, of course, in the motorcycling world.
EVs and the knobs and switches crowd. We just got a question about that. This is an interesting question. Almost all pure battery electric EVs are leaning very heavily into touchscreens for almost everything. Now, there are some. The Mach-E has a big knob right there mounted on the touchscreen itself. I of course, in some hybrids. I was just in the Maverick, which is very knob and switch focused, but that's not a battery EV. It's just a hybrid. And I think some of the Rivian, I think there's some pushback to going all touchscreen. So you get varying levels of touch versus physical control. It's not dead yet. Any other questions?
All right, we'll leave it at that. Sorry we couldn't answer all your questions. But thanks a lot for having us, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah. We can, so how about this? If David and Jason can stick around in the chat for just a couple of minutes, I think there's a question about motorsports. Maybe they can type in a response there. Sorry, I gotta crack the whip, get the cane out, and keep things moving along here. So David, Jason, that was just what we were hoping for. This was terrific. Also, I will be borrowing the pun about a hot topic regarding battery fires. So that was delightful.
Good. Thanks again for having us.
Thanks. All right. Okay, so here we go. We're going to do a quick transition. The stage is going to go dark for like 10 seconds, and we're going to bring Janelle Brooks up in just a couple of moments to talk a little bit more about how AVs can increase happiness for at-risk populations. So the stage is going to go dark for 10 seconds. Don't worry. It's going to come right back. Thanks, everyone.